chronic GI issues. So I really see people in two buckets, which is this preventative medicine bucket, which encompasses body composition optimization, hormone replacement therapy for men and women, and prevention of chronic diseases. And then I see people with chronic GI issues as well. And then Dr. Sarah Williams, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm Dr. Sarah Williams, and I'm a naturopathic doctor as well. And as you can see, we pretty much specialize in the same things. So I specialize in body composition, weight management, heart disease management, things like that, as well as hormone replacement and chronic GI conditions like IBS is probably one of the most common things I see. So yeah, we're very similar in what we like to see.
Awesome. And let's go. I want to talk a little bit about the modern med ethos, and really what separates us from other integrated practices out there. Some of my key values that we focus on at Modern Med, number one is transparency. So I really like people to understand if they are getting supplements from a doctor, where's that money going? And so we've made it so that our business is structured that the doctor who is prescribing your supplements is not profiting off of the supplements directly. It takes out any inherent biases that are there. And so we're very transparent about that. Authenticity. We are not into fads or trends and social media things. One of my favorite things on social media is to debunk a lot of that stuff because I think there's so much misinformation out there. No BS. I really want to be straight to the point, get you the information that you need. And we want to be a signal amongst all of the noise that is out there in social media. I really developed Modern Med because I was very confused before I went back to school. So my background was nutrition. And I started listening to podcasts. And on podcast, at when I was younger, I believed everything that I heard on a podcast. I thought you could only say true things, and that ends up being not the case. And I just remember being so confused. Like this person saying this thing, this person saying this thing. If you scroll on social media, somebody tells you to eat carnivore, the next person tells you you have to eat vegan, low fat, high fat, butter, olive oil, margarine. It's like, what is the actual truth? And I've learned a lot in this process. And so one of my main goals is just to help create a signal amongst all the craziness that's out there and help simplify health because I really believe it can be much more simple than it is. And so let's talk about the obesity epidemic, Dr.
All
Williams.
right. Perfect. So let's kick it off. So, as you probably already know, obesity is on the rise. And so that's essentially what we're seeing with this graph. We're seeing that in 2000, about 30% of the population were obese. And then in 2020, that increased about 12% at 42% of people were obese, which is really significant. And so it continues to increase. On the next slide, we'll dive into the more recent years. And so this is 2021 to 2023. And so the obesity rate total is still high at about 40%. And I think this one is interesting because we also get to see that male and females are both really similar for their rates of obesity. They're pretty similar there. And then also, I think an interesting thing we get to see with this graph is that the highest rate of obesity is in ages 40 to 59. And then interestingly, we see a decrease actually after age 60. And this is partly due to loss of muscle, which we'll be talking about more today too.
Yeah, so I find this really interesting in terms of the age. It makes sense. I think those are like child raising years, right? When people are really busy, they're still working, and they're raising kids. So there's a lot going on, and it's harder to potentially prioritize health. And yeah, the 60 and older is slightly deceiving, given that there can still be normal weight obesity. So this is based on BMI data versus looking at body composition, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. That's a perfect segue to this slide. So some of the ways we assess weight, body mass index or BMI is the most common, which is essentially your weight divided by your height. But the one issue with BMI is it doesn't tell us what your weight is made of. So it tends to overestimate fat in very muscular people and underestimate fat in older adults who have actually lost muscle, which is what you were just referring to. And so we still use this. Obviously, it's definitely a good indicator, but But another way that I like to assess this with patients is by measuring your waist circumference. And this you can easily do at home. And so how you do this is you just get a tape measure and you're going to place it around your abdomen, parallel to the floor like this. You're going to put it at the top of your hip bone while you're standing, and that will tell us the inches around your waist. And so if it's greater than 40 inches for men or greater than 35 inches for women, we're at considered increased risk. And so what this helps us identify is your risk for abdominal obesity or visceral fat, which is putting us at risk for many health conditions, which we'll talk about next.
This is a great tracking tool. I tell people, like, if you're on your own weight loss journey, you're not working with a doctor who's tracking things for you. Like waist circumference, I think is a great thing to be tracking if you don't have access to a scanning machine like a DEXA, which we'll talk about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And so why does visceral fat matter? So visceral fat is that fat that is surrounding your organs and tissues in your abdomen, and it drives inflammation. So if we have higher visceral fat, we see a significant increase in mortality, which is our chance of dying. And we also see an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, fatty liver, high cholesterol, and heart disease, even cancers. Up to 13 cancers have been associated with higher visceral fat. And we also see an increase in cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. So this is really important that we are assessing your visceral fat and lowering it if it's elevated to decrease your risk moving forward. And also, even as little as 5% of weight loss, we see measurable health benefits and decreased risk. So it doesn't take much, but it's definitely a really important marker to look at.
Yeah, and tying this back to the last slide, if you have an elevated or higher amount for your waist circumference, it's a great indicator that you likely have an elevated visceral fat. So obviously it's an indirect marker. We're not actually measuring visceral fat with a waist circumference, but it's a very good indicator that you likely have visceral fat or just fat around the midsection in general, even if it's subcutaneous, can increase the risk for cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the flip side of things, muscle is very, very important. And so when we talk about muscle, we're not just talking about aesthetics. We're talking about really one of the most powerful metabolic organs in our body. So the more muscle you have, the more calories your body burns at rest. The more muscle you have, the better you're able to burn fat. And more muscle also means better blood sugar regulation and helps with your insulin sensitivity. So how you regulate your blood sugar. It also, the more muscle you have, the better your glucose is taken up after a meal. So it plays a lot of really important roles. And it also releases these anti-inflammatory compounds called myokines to decrease overall inflammation and protect your heart. So our goal isn't just to reduce weight, it's really to protect and build muscle as you age to set you up for a healthy, long life.
And we'll talk about, you're going to keep talking about muscle here, but this is one where, I think about all the primary care doctors that I've seen personally. So, like, just putting myself in the patient case, never talked about muscle. Like, it was
Never.
never a discussion. I think very few people in primary care are talking about it. And I think that's an issue, right, with the system, just not enough time. So, I'm not blaming the doctors. But I really believe that we should be talking about muscle a lot more in primary care because it's a prevention issue. We're talking about prevention of many diseases, which I know we're going to discuss.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And so why this is even more important than what we were just talking about is as we age, we will naturally lose some muscle, which we'll talk about more in a second. But when that muscle loss becomes significant, we develop a condition called sarcopenia. And so if we get to this point of having sarcopenia, it is independently associated with a 60 to 100% higher risk of all-cause mortality. So essentially what this means is even if you don't have obesity or diabetes or heart disease, if you have significant muscle loss, you are still at increased risk of mortality. So this is huge for us to be looking at, and goes back to your point of how important this is for us to start talking about this more, like in the primary care space. I think would be a great place to start.
And just a little synopsis, like what is sarcopenia? How would you describe it?
Yeah, so sarcopenia is just referring to the progressive muscle loss that we have as we age.
Yep.
Yeah, and so, oh yeah. And unfortunately, muscle is really one of those things that if we're not using it, we lose it. This graph is showing how our muscle changes with age. So we are building our muscle through childhood and usually peak around 30. And then after that, unfortunately, our muscle will naturally decline. So after age 30, our muscle mass declines about 3 to 8% per decade. And then after age 50, it accelerates to 1 to 2% per year. So a dramatic drop off after age 50. And what's really important when we look at this graph is we see the green line is showing people who have an active lifestyle, they lose muscle at a much slower rate than the red line, which is people who have a sedentary lifestyle, drop off way faster. Their muscle loss decreases significantly. And this is important from a functional standpoint. If we drop off, we're more likely to become disabled, and we're unable to, do our daily tasks, get up and down the stairs, those types of things that, we don't always think about, but are really important for us to maintain independence as we age.
Yeah, I find this chart really revealing. And it's the delta between the two that I just find to be staggering. So I want to point it out here where if you look at, the age of 80, 90, where you end up if you are active versus where you end up if you're sedentary, and the difference between those two when you're looking at relative muscle strength and mass is huge. It's the difference between being preclinical for muscle versus actual clinical. And what that means is once you start to lose function is where we start to diagnose people with sarcopenia and all the increased health risks that come about it. So this is the threshold for not being able to do activities of daily living, right? So showering, getting your groceries, living alone, doing tasks by yourself. And whenever I talk to people and they're in this range and they're like in their 30s or 40s, like the last thing we think about is not being able to carry our own groceries. But we really need to start thinking about that way before any signs of it start, or it's like too late. I never want to say
Yeah.
too late because you can always start something now and we can always see improvements now. But the earlier you start to think about it, that's when
Mhm.
you see the most benefit. The analogy is like you would never start to save for retirement when you're 90, right? Like we want to think about that way before as early as possible.
I like that analogy. Really good point.
All right, so I want to go through a case study with you guys. This person's been anonymized, so his name's not actually Todd, but this is a real patient example. 45-year-old male. He came in with fatigue and weight gain, so he wanted to really just prevent chronic diseases moving forward and wanted to make sure he stays healthy for a really long time. And so I put him on an exercise program that was very detailed, a nutrition program with coaching, cholesterol lowering medication we started, and regular check ins for accountability and plan changes. And this is what we saw. So his apolipoprotein B started at 125, which is high. And after just a few months, we got him down to an ApoB of 60. His visceral fat when we first started the program was 2.07 pounds. And I really like somebody his age at 45 to be less than a pound of visceral fat. And he's currently down to 1.62 pounds of visceral fat. So still on the journey, but seeing great changes. Triglycerides started at around 115. And I like people less than 100 for triglycerides. It's a reflection of metabolic health and will reduce with weight loss and lifestyle changes, which you can see he's down to 80. And this is just, I think it's either 2 or 3 months apart, these two measurements here. And then if you look at total body fat, he started at 26.4% and reduced to 22.6%. And his fat mass, if you look at absolute numbers, he lost about little over 6 pounds of just fat. If you look at a model for how much that is, 6 pounds is quite a bit of fat mass, especially when we're considering this was 3 months change. Now, if all we had done was measure his weight, you would have seen that he gained 3 pounds. So you can see that like weight is not always a reflection of health changes. And so if we can, using waist circumference or more detailed measurements like a DEXA scan, we can really see changes because he put on a good amount of muscle mass in a really short amount of time. So he was really dedicated to his resistance training, training 3 to 4 times per week with a great plan in place, which is a huge factor for muscle gain results there. Um, Energy levels improved with this person, and he's really excited about his new like lifestyle. So he's continued with the resistance training. He continues to lose weight, and just feels better overall.
I love that example because, like you said, it really exemplifies how we can't just go off of weight alone. I mean, and that amount of muscle mass gain is really impressive. So it's a
Yeah, he
good
did a
one.
great job.
Yeah. So what causes weight gain? At the most basic level, weight gain happens when our energy intake exceeds our energy expenditure. So this is essentially how much we are consuming exceeds how much we're able to use or burn. And really why obesity is on the rise is partly because we live in what's called an obesogenic environment, if you guys have heard about that. So we have more ultra processed foods than ever before. These foods are engineered to be easy to overeat. They're very rewarding. They're less filling. So we're consuming more calories without even realizing it. And then we pair that with a reduction in physical activity. So our jobs, most of them now are sitting, whereas that didn't used to always be the case. And we're just not moving as much. So we pair those two together, and they're not really setting us up for success. And this graph on the right were some studies that were done that looked at which foods are associated with weight gain or protection against weight gain. And so, all of these we probably would expect to see this, but foods like chips, fries, processed meats, sweets, sugary drinks were all associated with weight gain, whereas you have foods like yogurt, vegetables, nuts, whole grains were associated with protection against weight gain. So I just like to see that visual there too.
I forget, do we
Uh,
have a slide that talks about palatability of food?
no, we don't.
Okay. I want to just come in with that right here because this is a great example of um, we want to, when we're talking about weight loss, think about how palatable foods are. And we have foods that are highly palatable, meaning that they're very easy to overconsume. These are things that are going to have a combination of either or of like salt, sugar, fat. Those are kind of like the three main things in any combination. So you could have like fat and salty, which is your potato chips. You could have sweet and fat, which is going to be your ice cream, right? But when you have these combinations of things, food scientists know this well that it makes something very easy to overconsume because it tastes really good. And we all know that, right? Like how easy it is to overconsume a pint of ice cream versus if I put like a barrel of apples in front of you. It actually might have a good amount of calories, but you could never consume like a whole like wagon full of apples, right? And so that's where you see things that are not highly palatable over here and highly palatable, and they're linked to obesity.
Yeah, yeah, it's really a bummer. But some other things that can cause weight gain are actually our hormonal changes. Especially we see this for women during like perimenopause, menopause, our sex hormones are changing, and this can shift where our fat is stored and tend to also reduce muscle mass. And we also see this in males with lower testosterone as well. So there is a factor there. And then one I just wanted to like briefly touch on that I think is really interesting is that the gut microbiome may play a role. So this is referring to the trillions of bacteria that are in our gut. There is some emerging research only done in mice so far, but they're showing a possible link between our gut bacteria and obesity. So I think it'll be interesting to see what comes of this. There's no causal relationship yet, but just an interesting one I wanted to touch on.
Would you recommend a probiotic for weight loss then?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
So I do, yeah, let's be clear about that. I don't recommend that, but yeah, just an interesting thing that came up in my research.
Yeah.
This is really important. What really has a much bigger influence on weight than most people realize is our genetics. So genetics, research indicates dictate our weight by 40 to 70%. This is a huge amount. So our genetics really regulate how we assess hunger, fullness, how we store our fat. So this really helps explain why weight loss is much harder for some people than it is for others. And I'm sure we've all kind of heard the term like eat less, exercise more. And it just doesn't work. That's not always the solution. And this is a big reason why. Genetics plays a huge, huge role. And then just to take this a step further, too, if a person has one parent that is obese, their own risk for obesity increases 3 to 4 times. And then if both of your parents are obese, your risk increases 10 times.
I think this is so important because I think that there's a big emotional tie to weight gain. And I think it's really important that we start to look at obesity more as a chronic disease and less as a personal failure. And
Absolutely.
society has not done a great job at putting this where it should be and really helping to empower people as to understand how they can lose weight versus feeling as if it's their fault or that they've done something wrong. And I know that we're not saying here that calories don't matter. It's actually one of the slides that we have that really important to be in a caloric deficit for weight loss, but also realizing that there's genetic components that are playing into appetite regulation, like Dr. Williams said.
Yeah, yeah. And so to go into this a bit further, there's a lot going on here on this slide, but essentially this diagram is showing how our appetite is regulated through this constant communication with our gut, our brain, our fat tissue. And so there's a lot of signals that we're getting. And so in a healthy system, when we eat, we trigger certain hormones like GLP-1 that makes us feel full. And then we have another hormone called ghrelin, which makes our hunger decrease. And then leptin comes from our fat tissue and tells us that we have enough energy and our appetite will stop and shut off. But unfortunately happens in obesity is the signaling gets disrupted. So our brain becomes resistant to those leptin signals, our satiety hormones are blunted, and our hunger remains high. So our brain is like falsely perceiving this starvation, even when we actually have plenty of energy stores. So once again, this is why weight loss isn't just about like discipline. We need to work on restoring the signaling between our gut, our brain, and really help to regulate all these signals to get into more of like a homeostasis, so to speak.
Yeah, this is exactly why GLP-1 medications work. And I want to be cautious about GLP-1s because there's GLP-1 supplements out right now. And they say that they target this pathway and just take the supplement because it's for some reason it's better for you than the medication that's FDA approved. What would you say to those people?
I would say that that is not worth your money. There's no evidence that those work similarly to a GLP-1 that's going to be not helpful for you. So I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah. And people are even promoting like eat these foods that increase GLP-1 that you naturally produce. But the thing that you have to remember with all of these gimmicks out there is that the GLP-1 that you naturally produce lasts for like seconds. Um, that's the reason these medications work is that they've been able to figure out how to extend the half-life of the GLP-1 agonist so that you're seeing the effects much longer than even the natural production of your own endogenous GLP-1. And so if there's a food that promotes GLP-1, I mean, if it's an apple, great. Apples are great for you. So I'm not going to tell you not to eat it, but we don't want to think about it as I'm stimulating GLP-1, so I'm going to get the same effect as Zepbound or semaglutide or something like that because they're not working in the same way. You need the extended half-life to actually see weight loss effects from something like that.
Yeah, completely agree. It's very different. Like, yes, we can eat more fiber and that's going to be beneficial, but it's not going to give you the same effects of a
Totally.
GLP-1 medication. Um, But also circling back to physical activity, because this is a really big piece. Most Americans aren't meeting the recommended amount of physical activity. And so that's what this graph is showing. It's showing the amount of people who do meet those activity guidelines. And you can see how it just progressively decreases as we age. So we do see, pretty low amounts of people who are meeting these guidelines, especially as we increase age.
The thing that bums me out about this, to be transparent, is that women consistently exercise less than men at virtually every stage of life. So I
Yeah.
think we need to figure out why that is. I think maybe women are busier. I don't know.
Yeah. What you said at the beginning rings true for me. I was thinking about how, midlife where we have babies and we're just
Yeah,
managing so much. It's so hard to find the time to work out, the amount that we're supposed to.
yeah.
So that's probably why. Um, and another thing that we've all heard a lot of people say is, well, it just feels like my metabolism has slowed down. I think that's why, like, I'm just having a hard time losing weight. My metabolism must have changed. And interestingly enough, this study was actually more recently done in 2021, looked at how our metabolism changes as we age. And what we actually found is that our metabolism does not change until after age 60, actually. And even then, we can see on the graph, it's a very slight decrease. It's really not a big difference. So it's not that our metabolism itself, which is like the ability to burn our calories, is changing. It's really likely due to all the other things that we've discussed so far today.
And after age 60, isn't it like 0.7% change or something? It's like
Yeah,
very, very small. Yeah.
yeah.
Any changes? I think this is the same study that looked like sometimes you can see people change metabolism, but it's directly related to muscle loss. So if somebody lost a bunch of muscle between the ages of 30 and 50, then that change in muscle mass can absolutely reduce your resting metabolic rate, but it's not because your metabolism itself slowed. It's because you have less lean muscle mass to fuel, so you require less calories, and it can be completely reversed with the addition of lean muscle mass.
Yep. All right. I've been seeing a patient once again, anonymized. His name is Jacob for this though. A 45-year-old male, and he is one of those people who has struggled with weight since he was young. So around 10 years old is really when he started struggling. And he, like a lot of people, have done everything, all the different diets, diet pills, fads, exercise programs, and sometimes with temporary benefit, but weight would always come back. And so when he came to me, he was in the severe obesity range with a BMI of 52.3. And he also had fatigue and joint pain. And when we did his labs, he also was pre-diabetic. So his hemoglobin A1C, which is looking at your average blood sugar over the last 3 months, was at a 6.0. And his insulin was quite high at a 50. And so we did some work around nutrition and got him on an exercise program. And we did a GLP-1 agonist. He was a great candidate for it. And we've seen really great success. As always with anything, it takes time, but in a year, he's lost 82 pounds, and he's decreased his BMI now is to a 39.5. So he's out of that severe obesity range. And importantly, he feels like himself again. He's like, I'm flaunting myself at this pool party, and like he wears like double XL shirts now for the first time in his whole life. So it's completely changed his life, his ability to be social and how he feels, his energy improved. And then also, from a physiological standpoint, his blood sugar is drastically improved. So we got him out of the pre-diabetic range. His A1C is optimal now to 5.4, and his insulin significantly decreased, is now at a 12. So he's significantly decreased his risk for diabetes and chronic health conditions by this weight loss.
And what were like the major behavioral changes that he made during this journey?
Um, I got him to be more consistent with working out, which was hard. When you are severely obese, it's hard to know like where to start. But he got a kettlebell and works out now, most days a week, even if it's just for 20, 30 minutes, he does something. And extra and nutritional wise, we just like made some swaps to, focus more on protein was one of the biggest things.
Awesome.
And decrease processed foods, of course.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So the main ways that we support is going through a DEXA body composition scan, which is a bit what Dr. Mary was talking about before, where we get to look at your visceral fat, your muscle mass, your fat mass, to really give us a deep dive into where you're at and gauge your progress as we work together. We also do comprehensive blood work, so we will look at those metabolic markers like your blood sugar, we'll look at your cardiovascular risk with lipids, and more specific markers like your ApoB. And then we check, your hormones, inflammatory markers, things like that. And we're really big into the foundational pieces like nutrition and exercise. So we give a lot of guidance in those areas too. And we also don't want to overlook stress and sleep and also your relationship to food, like emotional eating, things like that, and how that plays a role. So we talk about all of those things. And then we also utilize evidence-based weight loss medications like GLPs, if appropriate as well.
Okay, so before we go to that, I want to do a little bit of question and answer. We've had some great questions come in. Um, Somebody asked, how do you measure visceral fat? So, one of the ways that we talked about before for visceral fat is actually a DEXA scan, right? So, you can actually get a scan that looks at the whole body and it's going to break things down into subcutaneous fat, just total body fat that is seen. And then it'll also tell you your visceral fat. So the fat that's actually around the midsection and the organs that increases the risk more so than subcutaneous fat. And Dr. Williams, do you want to talk about the other way that we looked at, which is not a direct measure of visceral fat, but if you don't have access to a DEXA scan, what you can look at?
Yeah, you can measure your waist circumference with a tape measure. So yeah, you were just going to place that, above your hip bones, and that will measure your waist circumference and tell us, possible risk for visceral fat.
Great.
And one of the other questions, why would GLP-1s be deficient in the body, or why would you have leptin resistance? And this really goes back to the genetic piece. And so genetics play a big role here with how that signaling occurs. So that's what I would say with that. It's not necessarily that our GLP is deficient. It's just that that signaling gets disrupted and doesn't work as well when we have certain genetic factors.
hmm And then leptin resistance, we can also see like a feed forward mechanism where in obesity, we see higher leptin production, which can create this resistance to leptin and disrupt signaling pathways for appetite as well.
Another one is how can insulin be measured? And so just to go into insulin a little bit more, it's a hormone that comes from our pancreas to help us utilize glucose and put it into our cells efficiently. So insulin resistance is often one of the precursors to diabetes, and could be a sign of blood sugar dysregulation and issues with weight management. But the best way to measure it is just through a blood test. You do a fasting insulin, and that will give us a really good baseline for where you're at.
Yep. And somebody asked about post-thyroid cancer, having a hard time losing weight, which is very, very common. It's not the first time that I've seen this, or people with hypothyroidism that are on thyroid replacement therapy can have a harder time losing weight as well. The only thing that I'll say to this is that weight loss doesn't we don't change how we recommend weight loss based on that. So it's not like we have this special other tool for people that have hypothyroidism, other than, of course, we're going to manage thyroid levels. But if thyroid levels are well managed by your endocrinologist and still having a hard time losing weight, then we're looking at implementing a caloric deficit, right? And potentially using GLP-1 medications. So the kind of tools that we have for weight loss don't shift because somebody has a history of something going on with the thyroid or is on thyroid replacement therapy. It's still the basic principles that we've discussed today. And then one more is asking, let me just read this quickly.
Think one is asking about the obesogenic slide where we were talking about the foods. The different colors are just referring to, they took this from three different studies. And so the different colors are just referring to the different studies that they did.
Great.
Yeah.
This is a long question. I'm trying to read it before I answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody's asking, and maybe Erin, maybe add in a clarifying question here, but it looks like, um, what if high intensity exercise is hard, either due to physical limitations or increase in inflammation markers? I'll just answer that part first. You don't have to start with high intensity exercise. So I actually usually recommend starting with low intensity exercise and then building up gradually as you can. Um, Inflammatory markers can be elevated for a variety of reasons. So obesity alone, just being overweight, can increase your CRP levels. This is something to talk to your doctor about. Why do they think your CRP? I'm guessing that's the marker or whatever marker it is. Why is that elevated? Is there rheumatoid arthritis present? Is there another inflammatory condition that's present? Or do they think that it's actually due to overweight or obesity, in which case exercise, weight loss will eventually lower your CRP. Exercise is a hormetic stress response, so it can acutely increase inflammation, but it doesn't mean that we don't exercise because of that, because long term it will reduce inflammation that's there. And so it's all about talking with your clinician about what can you do right now feasibly given how you feel, but it doesn't have to be high intensity exercise to start. We want to start at a level that feels really doable and really plausible and build from there. You also asked about over exercising. And if we go back to that slide, of course, over exercising is a thing. I work with some really elite athletes, and I see it a lot in that population where people, well, I wouldn't even say a lot. So even in athletes, it's not a super common thing. And so for the majority of people are not over exercising, they're under exercising. But again, I would need to know more about how many hours per week, at what intensity level you're doing. And we can see in the lab sometimes certain levels will elevate due to over exercising. But again, I've seen it a few times in my practice, and they've all been elite athletes that come back with over exercising, which can lead to something called OTS, which is overtraining syndrome, but much less likely than under exercising. I lost that slide. Any other questions, or should I move on to a couple other things? Got it. I'll keep asking the questions because we may still have time at the end, but I want to go through what Dr. Williams is offering right now. Dr. Williams sees patients that are located in California via telemedicine. So, all areas of California we can see people in. And if you look at other integrated practices, this is actually directly from another integrated practice where their initial visit is around 2,500. They do out-of-pocket lab testing. They don't go through your insurance for blood work and things like that. Adding on a ton of supplements, we're much more cautious with how many supplements we recommend at Modern Med, but that total value of just a few months of treatment is looking at $5,600 to $9,800, and this is directly from a leading functional medicine company. At Modern Med, we do a complimentary phone call with Dr. Williams, which she has available today and the next couple of days. If you want to email or call us to schedule that, just to answer any questions you have about your personal health. You also get unlimited access to Dr. Williams through a portal to message between appointments. So if you have a question, you don't have to wait till your next appointment. You get a monthly visit with her every single month. We put your labs through your insurance because you're paying for your insurance. You should use it. So if you have a good PPO plan, we can use that for your blood work. And we really focus on essential testing. This separates us from other integrated practices out there. You may have seen another functional medicine doctor or integrative doctor, and they did a stool test on you and a saliva test and a urine test, and you spent thousands of dollars on blood work. And I can promise you, I don't think that's going to give you better outcomes. And we have great outcomes with in-depth testing that's going to give you a really good overview of your general health and give you an idea of how to prevent chronic disease moving forward, but nothing that's not going to give you actionables, because if you're doing a test, you want to have actionables to follow it. We also have a dedicated patient care coordinator who has her own Google reviews. Jean is amazing. She's been with us for over 6 years, and she's available via text and email and is wonderful. Um, we are a team of two doctors. This is previous. So there's two of us that meet about your cases. You get two sets of eyeballs on your case, and we talk and review cases between the two of us all the time. And you'll get a personalized supplement review of what you're taking. And we want to make it so if you're taking a supplement, it's doing one of two things. It's either helping you live longer or improving your quality of life. And ideally has measurable ways to track that as well and has evidence to support it. And again, the doctor who is prescribing your supplement is not benefiting financially from that supplement that they're suggesting. So this takes out an inherent bias that is there. And we do provide super bills for reimbursement. And so this total cost, if you add everything up, is around $4,000, but we charge $467 per month with a 3-month commitment. So we really don't expect people to be completely where they want to be in 3 months. We want you to have a buy-in for at least 3 months and then decide what you want to do from there. We're offering a 20% discount for the first 3 months, and this brings that number from 467 per month down to 389 for the first 3 months. And this is available just until this Friday, January 16th at 5 p.m. So if you are interested in making changes in body composition with somebody who has done this with many, many people, please give us a call, email us. This is how you can do it. So our phone number is right here. Feel free to like screenshot this slide. You can also email us at admin@modernmed.com and set up a complimentary call with Dr. Williams for today or the rest of this week. And you can also just sign up if you're ready. If you're not interested, but you wanted to wait for the special offer at the end of the webinar, this is what this is right now. So we're offering 20% off all supplements for 1 year, regardless of if you become a patient or not. And again, this is the how-to. So you're going to go to the Modern Wellness Shop on our website, email us, tell us you're at the webinar, and Jean will put that on your account for you. If you have any other questions,